Hi everyone. Today I'm going to talk about Azure Logic Apps. But before we get started with that, I'll give a short introduction about me. So I'm Poonam. I work as a full stack developer at Salesforce, and I help them build a project called Customer Data Platform. So that's about me. And let's get started with Azure Logic Apps. Let's look at the agenda first. So we'll look at what Azure Logic Apps are, what key components of Azure Logic Apps are, how Logic Apps work, why we should use Logic Apps. Then we'll quickly look at an example and we'll conclude the session. So what is an Azure Logic App? So it's basically an offering by Microsoft Azure that helps you schedule, automate, and orchestrate tasks and business processes in the form of workflows. Think of a logic app as a workflow where you have certain set of actions that you can perform based on a trigger. So if I have to give an example, suppose you have a team where you have tasks allocated to a team. When you work in an organization, you have some Jira boards or Azure boards where you manage all the tasks that are assigned to individual team members. Now these tasks can have a status, like the task can be in a new state, in an in progress state when a developer or tester is working on it. Then it can go to another states like ready for review and a close state. So if I have to write a logic app on it. Suppose the status of this ticket changes from new to any other state. I want to have a logic app that will trigger an email to all the team members in the team, and it will basically notify that okay, this team member has changed the status to this, and so we have a visibility what is going on in the team. So that is one use case of a logic app. You can use it for multiple options. So Azure Logic Apps are basically no code solution to small projects where you can build such small projects where you don't need to maintain the infrastructure. You just need to go to Azure Portal, create a logic app, write some different steps, include connectors, what the output of the logic app would be, and then you're done. You have your logic app and it's running and doing the task for you. Now let's look at what key components of logic apps are. Workflow is basically a set of actions that consists in the logic app. Logic app is runs on a trigger. So suppose there is a event, like the status of our task changes from new to some other status. That would be a trigger for our logic app. So we have connectors. So we connect. In our case, we'll connect to Azure boards in this particular example. So we have 200 plus connectors that we can use within Logic Apps. Then we have triggers. So a trigger is basically a custom event that will trigger our Logic App. It will be the starting point of our Logic App. Then we have actions. Actions are basically the steps that will get performed once the Logic app gets entered by the trigger that we have mentioned. So the action would be in the example that I mentioned. Action would be that send an email to the team members. Now let's look at how these logic apps work. As I mentioned, we can have our data from multiple sources. It can be a blob storage or a web connector or a scheduler or our data 365. So as I mentioned, first action would be trigger. So for example, I have a request coming from a web request coming from our application. Suppose you want to check the health of your application. It You keep running an app this API, a health check API on your application. So in this case, we'll use a schedule. The schedule, it will do is every 15 minutes or whatever timer you have set. Based on that timer, it will go and check what the status of the health check API is. So this health check API will basically go and check the microservice or your application. It will be a simple API. It will give a 200 response if your API goes through. Otherwise, it will give an error. So and it will run on a schedule of 30 minutes. Let's consider 30 minutes. So it will come every 30 minutes. This will run. If you have a 200 status, then it's fine. It will so on the schedule, it enters the trigger, it checks the status. We'll have a conditional action here in place which will check the status. If it is 200, then the condition can go to do nothing. And if the status is other than 200, then we can send an email to the team saying that something is wrong with this microservice or application, so that the team can go and look at it. This is how logic apps work. Now, the question is why we should use logic apps when we can build applications from scratch. So, to make it simple, we cannot code everything. We already work on a lot of projects in a day. So there are so many things that we have to take care of when we work on a project. We have to take care of monitoring. We have to schedule some emails based on certain scenarios. So not everything we can maintain in the project. So we can go and create logic apps for such small use cases. Instead of going and creating an application from ground up and then maintaining it, Azure provides us auto scale capability. So it gets handled and taken care by the platform itself, so that we don't have to run into the hassle of maintaining all these mini applications. So that's when logic apps comes into picture. And we have a list of many use cases that that we can look at when we are looking at logic apps. So first of all, logic app has a no code solution. So anyone can go and use it. Even business analysts, business persons can go and create a logic app. You have a very beautiful designer for logic apps, where you can go drag and drop components, and it has easy to use tools where you can create variables in each action, and you can use those variables in subsequent actions. Then as we looked at the different components of logic apps, we can connect it to different systems using connectors that Azure provides out of the box. And you can also have custom connectors in case there is no out of the box solution for it. Also, it is a write once reuse solution. So like we took an example of the status change of our task. So this can be implemented in multiple teams, not just one team. So you just write this logic app once, and then you can use multiple instances of this logic app in multiple teams. So you get to reuse it, and you can access all the resources within your Azure ecosystem. Also, it's very cheap when it comes to logic apps, because it is a serverless solution, and you're using a very minimal code or no code solution. So you pay as you go for this model. Now, let's look at an example of how logic apps are created and consumed. So, for let's look at what the example is. So, suppose there is an e-commerce application where you want to check a reaction to a new product that you have added to the portal. Suppose there is an e-commerce website and a new product is launched recently, and you want to check what is the user sentiment on that product. So we are going to check this based on the social media interaction on that product. So on the left hand side image, we see there's a flow chart which says when there is a new tweet about your product, you will go and detect the sentiment on it. So a new tweet will be a trigger, as you can see parallel to the image on the right. Your new tweet will be a trigger in our case. So we'll as we move forward, we'll compare the left image to the right image and try to assemble it into all the components that we have in our logic app. So once we got the tweet, here we'll connect with Twitter API using the Twitter connector that's provided by Azure. And the next step is we'll detect the sentiment. So detecting sentiment is an action that will perform. So for detecting sentiment, we'll run an AIML model based on the language that is used in the tweet. And then we'll we'll get a score which is an output of this detect sentiment action. And based on the score, if it is greater than a certain value, we'll decide if it is a positive sentiment or a negative sentiment. If it is a positive sentiment, then we don't need to do anything. If it is negative, then we'll trigger an email to our customer service team. So that is the example. So the first image here talks about the Twitter connector. So we use the connector here. So if we use a connector, we get certain actions. Like this connector has a list of all the APIs that the a third service is providing. So it uses the APIs of that external service to uh, basically derive the information out of it. So here under actions, we can get all the information regarding the followers, the users, whatever APIs that Twitter has exposed, we can get all those information. We can also get the tweet information based on this. And our trigger in this case would be when a new tweet is posted. So in the image below, we see when a new tweet is posted, we will search for text which is related to our product. The product name, description, anything that's related to the product, we'll search it uh, on the data that we received from Twitter. And whatever matching tweets we receive, we will perform our sentiment analysis on it, and we will give a numeric score to it. And based on that score, we'll perform an action. Now, if we, this is how it will look in our Azure portal. So, if you go to an Azure portal, you can go to the global search. There, you can search for Azure Logic Apps, or you can go and create a resource directly. There, you can see the option of Azure Logic Apps. Then, once you are into Azure Logic Apps, you will see out of the box templates that are provided that you can go ahead and use. Otherwise, for your particular use case, you can go and create a blank Logic App as well. So in our case, we will create a blank Logic App, and once you create a blank Logic App, it won't contain any of these boxes. You will have to drag and drop these options. So before entering this, you'll have to go to a Logic App Designer, which will be on the left hand side. So this is the example that we just discussed in the form of our Logic App Designer, where we have the actions. So all of these boxes are nothing but actions. The first action is a trigger, and that trigger in our case is when a new tweet is posted. Then the next step is we detect the sentiment. Then we have a condition which says that if the score after running the model we get some output in step 2, we can store it in a variable and use that value here. And so you see the score, it is blue colored, so it means that it is a variable that we are using from the previous step. And if that value is greater than zero point 0.7, then it is positive sentiment. Then we just insert it into our database for our record. And if it is less than zero point 0.7, then it is a negative tweet. Then we have to trigger an email and notify our team so that our team can go and take action on that tweet, responding to the customer. So this is how Logic App is designed. It's very simple. If you come from a coding background, then for you it's just plug and play kind of thing. And even for business professionals, it is very easy to use because you get a pictorial view of what is being done in a flow chart kind of manner. So that's all I had for today. I hope Logic Apps might have excited you. And I just wanted to mention one thing, that Logic Apps are not an entirely solution for a project, because you have limited connectors, or you don't you have limited set of things that you can do in Logic Apps. So if you have some custom requirement, you can go and look at Azure Functions, which is yet another offering by Microsoft Azure, where it is also used for creating serverless solution, but you can code your solution into it. So that is a wonderful option if you have more complicated custom requirement. But if you have very small use cases processes like triggering an email or sentiment analysis, then you can go ahead and use logic apps. It will save you the time, and ultimately you will be able to work on more important projects. That's all I had for today. Thank you, guys.